Hello, and welcome to Short Stories. Today's short story comes from a book written by Jonathan Swift called Gulliver's Travels, which was first published in 1726. It consists of several stories about a man named Gulliver who travels to several remote nations in the world. The most famous voyage in this book is his trip to the nation of tiny people, Lilliput. But I don't want to talk about that trip. Instead, I want to tell the tale of Gulliver's trip to the city in the sky, Laputa. If you are a Studio Ghibli fan, that name might be familiar to you. Laputa was the setting for the movie Castle in the Sky. Before I can tell you about the voyage to Laputa, I will first tell you the vocabulary and example sentences. After the story, I will read 4 listening comprehension questions. Let's get started. Vocabulary: surgeon, surgeon. The surgeon removed the tumor. Cut to the chase. Cut to the chase. I didn't have long to talk, so I cut to the chase and asked for a donation. Daydream. Daydream. Tom is not a good student because he is always daydreaming in class. Philosopher. Philosopher. Socrates was an ancient Greek philosopher. Laboratory. Laboratory. Dexter returned to his laboratory to finish his experiment. Excrement. Excrement. If you don't clean up your dog's excrement, you will be fined $5,000. Thesis. Thesis. He spent 6 years writing his doctoral thesis. Nonplussed. Nonplussed. His question made me feel completely nonplussed. The story. One day I was sitting at home drinking some tea when Captain William Robinson, commander of the Hopewell, a stout ship of 300 tons, came to my house. I had formerly been a surgeon on another ship where he was master. He had always treated me like a brother, so I was happy to see him. We chatted for some time, and he mentioned that he was planning to go on a voyage to the East Indies in about 2 months. Finally, he cut to the chase and invited me to join him. "You'll have another surgeon working under you," he said. "Additionally, I'll pay you double." How could I refuse? We set out on the 5th day of August, 1706, and made several stops on our way to the East Indies. Suddenly, a great storm came and blew us off course. We sailed for 10 days, not knowing where we were exactly. On the 10th day, we were chased by 2 pirate ships. The pirates boarded our ship, but I managed to escape in a lifeboat. I spent the next few days searching for land. Eventually, I discovered a small island that had fresh water for me to drink. I was very relieved. After spending the night on this island, a very strange thing happened. While collecting eggs from a bird's nest, I noticed a large shadow creeping over me. I turned and saw a vast, opaque object between me and the sun moving forwards towards the island. As it approached nearer the place where I was, it appeared to be solid with a flat, smooth bottom that shone very brightly from the reflection of the sea below. I took out my spyglass and was shocked to discover people walking around on top of it. "A city in the sky!" I exclaimed. The island moved closer, and someone let down a ladder. A man peered over the ledge and beckoned me to climb up. Once I was in the floating city, I was greeted by several strange-looking gentlemen. They wore robes and togas that were covered with images of stars and flutes. They had one eye that was constantly looking up, and the other was constantly turned inwards. Each of these gentlemen employed a servant who was armed with a stick. I later discovered that the job of these servants was to hit their masters in their faces whenever they started daydreaming. These gentlemen escorted me to the king, who was very busily studying some kind of astrological chart. When I entered, the king didn't notice me until a servant whacked him in the face. "Oh, hello there," he said. "Welcome to Laputa." I asked about the city, and he told me that Laputa was a city designed and built by philosophers and scientists. "We only study the noble sciences here, math, astronomy, geometry, and music," he concluded. He showed me to my room and gave me a fresh set of clothes, which fit very poorly. However, the tailor who made the clothes assured me that they were made with the most accurate geometrical calculations. The next day, I was brought to their university. "The greatest engineers and inventors in all of Laputa's empire do their research here," the king told me. I was allowed to talk to the inventors in the university's laboratory. The first was an old man with sooty clothes and an even sootier beard. He told me that he had spent the last 8 years trying to extract sunbeams out of cucumbers. "In another 8 years, maybe I'll finish," he told me. Then he turned to the king, held out his blackened hat, and added, "With a little more funding, of course." The king grumbled and reluctantly put 2 coins into the hat. I went into another lab, but was ready to hasten back, being almost overcome with a horrible stink. The scientist in this room was even older, and his face and beard were stained yellow, and his clothes were completely filthy. He greeted me with a hug, which I was too polite to resist. He told me that his goal was to reduce human excrement to its original food by separating out the different parts and removing the bile. "I hope to publish my findings soon," he said with a sigh. I was in a hurry to get out of there, so I quickly thanked him for sharing his experience with me and ran to the next lab. The last lab I visited was being used by a doctor. He had invented a new method for treating people with bowel pain. His solution was to use a bellows to suck excess gas out of a person through the anus. If the patient is constipated, he explained, air can be pushed back into the bowels and then suddenly released like a balloon. He demonstrated this operation on a dog. After he had pumped air into the dog's anus about 3 times, the poor animal looked like it was ready to burst. When he released the pressure, the rushing air exited the dog so loudly that it was very offensive to me and the king. The dog died on the spot, and we left in a hurry. The king was now visibly embarrassed. Maybe you'd like to see one of our classrooms." He escorted me to the teaching hall and showed me their largest classroom. There was already a lesson being taught when we arrived. "This is our most brilliant professor," the king said proudly. The professor, who was dressed in a black robe and wearing a graduate's cap on his head, was busy overseeing the work of about 40 students. They were all standing around a large square contraption in the middle of the room. Some were pulling levers, others were taking notes. The professor greeted us and explained what was happening. "With this device, Even the most ignorant person can write books on philosophy, mathematics, and poetry. Let my students demonstrate for you." I watched and saw that when the front row students turned the levers on the device, random words appeared in the middle of the square. The back row students took note of these and used them to compose an academic thesis. "Thanks to this machine," the professor boasted, "I have been able to publish more papers than any other professor in history." I pretended to be impressed and told him that I would tell everyone back in England about his wonderful machine. After these visits, I became wary. "I'd like to go home now," I said. The king was nonplussed. "What?" he exclaimed. "But I haven't shown you our concert hall or planetarium yet." I politely insisted that I be allowed to return to England. The king could not refuse, and he arranged for a boat to be prepared for my voyage home. The next day I said goodbye and set sail. As I drifted away, I looked back at Laputa and thought, what a silly place. Now the questions. Number 1. How did Gulliver get into the city of Laputa? A. He flew in an airplane. B. He took a train. C. He drove a car. D. He climbed a rope ladder. Question 2. Who built Laputa? A. Gulliver. B. The Lilliputians. C. William Robinson. D. Philosophers and scientists. Question 3. Why was the king embarrassed by the university? A. The scientists were all disgusting. B. The scientists were all failures. C. The professor didn't publish enough books. D. Both A and B. Question 4. In the end, what was Gulliver's opinion of the city of Laputa? A. It was not a serious place. B. It was a wonderful place. C. It had the greatest geniuses he had ever met. D. He wanted to stay forever.